Today, I will tell you about one of the greatest threats to the galaxy of the 42 millennium, known as the Tyranids. Let's start with who the Tyranids are. The Tyranids are an alien race from another galaxy whose sole purpose is the consumption of all forms of genetic and biological material for subsequent evolution and reproduction. The Tyranids are governed by a collective mind, the location of which is known to anyone. Moreover, the very concept of a supreme being controlling the Tyranids seems somewhat otherworldly in the Imperium, given the existence of the Emperor, the Magi of Theodeptus. Mechanicus believed that the collective mind may simply be a psychic network that connects the Tyranids and allows them to access collective knowledge about the location of all living beings. Some believe that it is a massive and powerful psychic monster that merely uses the Tyranids as its slaves and puppets. Others believe it is one of the Old Ones who initiated a project to cleanse the galaxy of life, and especially Psychers. To calm the war, only a few Psychers have managed to glimpse into the mind of the Hive. One of them was Varro Tigurius, the chief librarian of the Ultramarines chapter. Here's how he described his experience looking into its dead black eyes. I saw a terrifying intellect replacing its soul further, the steely will of the master of this creature delving even deeper. I felt its progenitor indifferently assessing me, gazing from the void. Finally, from the very depths of the alien mind, what could only be described as an insatiable hunger stared back at me. We can strike the Tyranids on our planets, crush their fleets in space, grind their armies into bloody dust. But this hunger, we cannot overcome it. Initially, the Tyranids traveled to our galaxy from afar, possibly from another galaxy, journeying through the cold void of space for tens of thousands, perhaps even hundreds of thousands of years. No one knows where the Tyranids came from or how they arrived here. However, there are many diverse theories about this. Some think they're attracted to the Astronomicon, a psychic navigational beacon, created by the Emperor of Mankind and maintained by Psychers on Terra. For navigating the warp, they say the Emperor controls the Astronomicon, which is why its light remains so strong. This might have attracted the swarm from another galaxy. Some believe that the Tyranids are simply mindlessly advancing, consuming everything in their path, entire galaxies and billions of sentient species. Their list might include thousands of galaxies, and they continue to move forward, devouring everything in their path. There's also a theory that an even greater threat forced the race to flee from their established places in search of a new home, but it is difficult to even imagine what this threat could be. The simplest theory states that everything is due to a biotechnological device created by an unknown Xenos, known as the Beacon Pharos. The Necrons created Pharos long ago to travel long distances without the war, but during the Horus heresy, the Necrons were asleep. Yet a brave man named Barabbas d'Antioch of the Iron Warrior Marine Legion found the Phara so that Ruta Gilan could use it to gather the scattered loyalist forces in Imperium Secundus. The Pharos became the subject of battle when the Night Lords became determined to claim it in order to find Conrad Curse in the ensuing battle. D'Antioch overloaded the device to defeat the traitors. The overload was so powerful that it attracted the Tyranids. They noticed the light and arrived for a feast. Several 0 years later, the first officially recorded contact with the Tyranids for the Imperium of Man came during a Tyranid attack on an ocean world called Tyron. And from their hive, fleet behemoth continued directly towards the center of the galaxy, consuming all the worlds in its path. Tran was absolutely undistinguished. It was simply a small world, 80% covered in oceans with billions of underwater creatures. It was located on the eastern fringe of Ultramar 60, 0 light years from Terra. where the Adeptus Mechanicus of the Imperium of Man maintained a small research station at the station. The Mechanicus studied uncharted sectors at the edge of the galaxy. Never were there more than a few hundred explorator. At the same time, at the moment of the swarm's arrival on Tyann, the command washeled by Magos Vanek, he never expected to encounter High Fleet Behemoth near his planet, and experience the full agony of the Great Devourer invasion in his final transmission. He said, "We cannot live through this, mankind cannot live through this. In a single day, they have covered this planet with a flood of living blades and needle-fanged mouths. No, Tyran is a dead world. Thanks to the planet, Tyran the Tyranids received their name and classification in the Imperium Hive Fleet Behemoth, was defeated in the Battle of MCRA in the year 745 of the 41st Millennium Letus. Talk about the main adversary of the Tyranids, named Cryptman Inquisitor, Lord of the Ordo Xenos. He had long been gathering information about various anomalies on the eastern fringe of the galaxy, and one day received data about a strange phenomenon resembling a swarm which was moving toward the Tyrant system. He made a request to the Imperial Inquisition and flew to investigate the situation. Command had found a sterile dead PL planet that now bore no sign of the thriving ocean world it had once been. But he managed to secure a data repository discovered in the depths of the planet. There was information about the phenomenon that Cryptman named Shadow in the Warp, and he classified the threat itself as the Tyranids. The Shadow in the Warp is a very interesting phenomenon. The Tyranids seem to block communication with the Immaterium, making the use of any psychic abilities difficult. It feels as if the Tyranids knew where they were flying and wanted to inflict as much pain as possible on the Asani humans and all other psychic races. Also, the Shadow in the Warp does not allow for full-scale invasions of the real world by demons. Scholars suggest that the Shadow in the Warp is the result of a constant bilateral connection between the hive mind and smaller organisms. This connection is transmitted by hive ships, as well as hive tyrants brood, lords and some other species of the Great Devourer. The Shadow in the Warp complicates warp travel blocks, signals of astropaths, and disrupts the phenomena of psychers. The common man experiences anxiety and nightmares due to this phenomenon. Should a psyker attempt to use their otherworldly abilities, they suffer headaches and bleed from the eyes. Cryptman documented everything and understood that the threat was completely extraordinary, immediately beginning to act, sending all information to the Ordo Xenos. He received orders to fly immediately to Ultramar to MCRA in order to find and destroy the Tyranid fleet. Cryptman attempted to warn Manus Calgar, but he remained calm about the impending threat, even as the nearest planet to Manus Calgar, Prandium, was consumed in the end. The Ultramarines triumphed, but at the cost of thousands of fighter. After this clash, Cayman continued his study of the Tyranids and the search for means of their total annihilation, despite the fact that the Fleet Behemoth was essentially destroyed. It broke into small fragments, which greatly aided Adeptus Mechanicus with biosamples for the secret project the Analon created to study and find ways to exterminate the Tyranids. This happened in the year 1850 of the 41st millennium. It all ended when the creatures broke free and killed all the Mechanicus, as well as the Imperial Task Force in the year 9942 of the 41st millennium. Commissar Capus Kine, while on a mission on the ice world of Nusquam Fund, Mentibus discovered hibernating Tyranids. Buried deep in the permafrost, the swarm was apparently carried to the planet by a hive ship that had crashed on the planet 7 millennia earlier, prior to any human colonization. Members of the swarm, and subsequently, the hive mind were awakened. But this swarm was eventually defeated. The Imperium ultimately emerged victorious. But the Inquisitors of Ordo Xenos had the thought that the Tyranids might have arrived in our galaxy long before the planet Tiran and Pharos, and even the Imperium. The hive mind most likely has been sowing tyrannid organisms in the Milky Way for tens of thousands of years. Moreover, not only here but possibly in other galaxies as well. This is indirectly indicated by organisms encountered on various death worlds, such as the deadly Kraken from Fenris or the Kitzkenderville. These creatures may be distant relatives of the organism that plagued the Imperium in the 42nd millennium. They did not consume worlds like Kaken because they have no connection to the hive mind. Nevertheless, they are still dangerous. The process of consuming a world by the Tyranids is very interesting to begin with. The Tyranids must find an appropriate planet for this. They use spectral analysis, but often it is simply a multitude of reconnaissance organisms. Mainly these are drone ships, Stealers and Lears, which travel on these ships. All individuals hide perfectly, and upon arrival at the desired world, they safely observe what is happening. Their essence is to survive and reproduce. Before they are discovered, it is important to understand that they are quite autonomous, because the orders of the hive mind do not always reach them. Usually the drone ship releases its cargo on a planet and flies on to scout other worlds. This happens very quickly, and thus the Imperium rarely notices them. However, if they do notice, the drone ship becomes a high priority, because once it releases its cargo on the planet, it will be very difficult to eradicate lictors, deadly organisms bred for their stealthy qualities. They are also masters of analyzing the local atmosphere for biomass and needed hive minerals. They can hunt and absorb local life forms, gaining their experience and memories, after which the information is compiled and sent to the hive mind when a synaptic node is within reach. But the most insidious Tyranids are of course the Jinn Stealers. They can attack a planet without drones, using various space hulks and transporters. Once they reach a planet, Jinn Stealers infiltrate, develop societies and create their own cults, which in the process weaken the world's defenses and send a psychic signal to the hive fleet that the planet can be consumed. Jinn Stealers attract Tyranids with the beacon of their psychic presence. The stronger it is, the more it attracts. The hive fleet, they sometimes ignore certain beacons, because Jinn Stealers might be brought to a remote colony on some rocky planet. But if the planet is rich in organics, then the beacon shines as brightly as possible. As soon as the hive fleet approaches the planet, it blocks communication with the entire system, with its shadow in the war, and upon arrival, it occupies the upper layers of the atmosphere and launches millions of mythic spores, which contain various types of Tyranids of all sizes and shapes. But the hive is fed not only by war, primarily it is fed by biomass, so along with killers. The hive delivers zoomorphic symbiotes to the planet, toxic crines which release clouds of poisonous spores, consisting of millions of newborn microorganisms, each connected to the hive. These spores destroy the immune system and annihilate the enemy. Other types of Tyranids gather all available biomass on the battlefield and later produce new types of Tyranids. All the planet's resources are used either to feed the hive fleets or to produce new tools for planet capture. The resources are collected by small Laval-like creatures. They resemble armored serpents with mouths full of serrated teeth and are known as rippers, the most voracious organisms of the hive. They crawl over the battlefield, devouring the dead and the wounded. Usually, there are so many of them that the ground is covered with a writhing carpet of lair, which the hive fleets produce in enormous quantities. Rippers are not deployed in the early stages of the invasion, so they are not simply wiped out, but if needed, they can engage in combat at any moment after feeding. Instinct drives the Ripper to the enormous Tyranid reclamation pools. They crawl to them and plunge inside to be digested, along with everything they have consumed from these pools. Capillary towers rise upwards They penetrate the planet's crust and ascend higher and higher, emerging with spore tubes that release countless alien spores into the atmosphere, infecting it. This helps to cleanse the planet of local flora. All vegetation is replaced by tyrannid plants, which are insanely aggressive when the spores darken the sun. The temperature on the planet begins to rise, turning it into a vast greenhouse, creating ideal conditions for the final phase of the invasion consumption. By this point, resistance on the planet is either non-existent or minimal, so trillions of rippers consume all the local flora and FAA, channeling it into the digestive pools. This continues until the biological materials of the planet are fully broken down in the final phase of the tyrannid invasion. The capillary towers connect with the immense suction trunks of the nutrient tubes descending from hive fleets hanging in low orbit. The absorbed biomass is then pumped onto the ships and distributed for the hive's needs. It should be noted that the towers do not care where they grow. They can appear in icy waters and the depths of the planet's ocean until the biomass absorption begins. The only salvation for the planet is exterminatus, though such planets are often beyond salvation. Nevertheless, this is the best time to strike the hive fleet, as it has likely exhausted all resources and is preparing to fill its belly with biomass. The approximate sequence of planet assimilation by the tyrannids, using the invasion of Diki Prime as an example, is as follows. Day 1, mytic spores are dropped, mostly containing licors and gin stealers. As soon as they hit the ground, the reproduction of tyrannid creatures likely begins immediately. Day N, by now the tyrannid infestation will have expanded to around 250 kilometers around the drop point, and will likely present a significant threat to Planetary Defense Force troopers and the resident Imperial Guard. Day 13, tyrannids have expanded to 700 kilometers from the drop point. Some may begin infesting local water. Sources: Day 37, tyrannids completely control the area within 2,000 kilometer radius of the drop point, and basilic infestation has begun to reach a 5,000 kilometer radius from the drop point of the first mytic spores. At day 48, tyrannid population growth becomes exponential, with population doubling approximately every 3 days. Day 50. The main HIV fleet arrives with the number of tyrannid craft in the swarm, generally numbering around 1.5 billion. All psychic contact with the planet through the warp is cut off by the warp shadow of the hive mind. Any attempts to escape are quickly stopped by the hive fleet. Any remaining surface life is eliminated by Gorn's Day 51. Primary consumption of planetary biomass begins. Broodships land, releasing ripper swarms, which consume all organic material and deposited at the reclamation pools. Capillary towers send the material into orbit for use by the hive fleet. Day 80. Ripper swarms board the brood ships and return to the hive fleet. The hive ships descend into the upper atmosphere and begin collecting it. Reduction in atmospheric pressure causes oceans to boil away, which are also collected so that their free water can be used by the fleet. The loss of ocean mass causes plate tectonic shifts, dramatically increasing volcanic activity across the victimized world. Upon completion, the hive fleet re-enters the warp in search of fresh prey. Day 100. The Imperial Navy arrives in response to the planet's original astropath distress call, only to find a destroyed, lifeless, uninhabitable planet. Later Bessaria call stated that the tyrannids only consume the surface of a planet water and microbes continue to live inside. So by using terraforming technology, the planet can be restored. This adds credence to the theory that the old ones want to cleanse the G galaxy to later repopulate it. But how do the tyrannids fly through space at all? Currently, the tyrannids are capable of traveling at speeds exceeding the speed of light thanks to an organism known as the Neural. This creature is unlike the other tyrannid bioships. It possesses a series of monofilament spines on its prow, which it uses to decipher a wide range of sensory input, including an incredibly extensive spectrum of gravimetric signals. With the help of this data, a navel can locate planetary systems at insanely distant ranges. Subsequently, by utilizing the gravity of this system, it creates a transit corridor of compressed space through which each naval and nearby ships traverse vast distances. When a navel exits the gravitational loop and arrives at the intended planet, hell begins earthquakes, solar flares, tsunamis, and other cataclysm. Sensu, of course. There are drawbacks to this method of trav. It cannot be used near a strong gravitational anomaly, because such anomalies disrupt the novel's data. If there is an obstacle during the journey, the Tyranids travel much slower and may take decades to complete their journey. It is important to understand that the Tyranids are not limited to the Hive fleet. Behemoth alone. Behemoth is generally controlled by the unified will of the hive mind and consists of billions of living creatures. There are enormous and powerful beasts that control everything and smaller ones that kill and devour. Humanity never discovered the location of the entity controlling the Hive fleet. The primary base of the Tyranids consists of 3 fleets: Behemoth, Leviathan, and Kraken. You already know the fate of Behemoth. However, the other 2 fleets were more successful. For instance, the Hive fleet Kraken, which, by the way, was the second major Tyranid fleet to invade the galaxy. It was Kraken that organized the Second Tyrannic War for following the First Tyrannic War conducted by the Hive fleet Behemoth. This occurred in the year 992 of the 41st millennium, 250 years after. The first invasion. The humans' major error was believing they had completely annihilated the Tyranids. The Kraken Hive fleet was named for its numerous different tentacles that attacked different worlds simultaneously. Unlike the Behemoth, which attacked as a single entity, this strategy significantly complicated life for the Imperium because the Tyranids targeted a vast territory. The shadow in the warp enveloped numerous sectors. Kraken attacked across a front measuring thousands of light years. Greatly complicating defensive efforts, the Imperium had to concentrate its force to defend the most crucial worlds. The Tyranids introduced new bioforms that dealt crippling blows before the Hive fleet's arrival, killing local authorities and sowing terror and confusion in the sectors. Particularly noteworthy were the Ginstealer cult. The Imperium was horrified by their sabotage and terrorism, as well as the endless unrest on various worlds. However, Kraken attacked not only the Imperium, but also the Asuran. It was Kraken that nearly destroyed the craft world. Yandan. The attack was repelled only with the aid of Prince Isle's forces. Nevertheless, the Asurans suffered tens of thousands of casualties, an unbearable luxury for them. Additionally, one of Kraken's tentacles destroyed the homeworld of the sides of the Emperor Soa. Their location of the Pharos, which was not destroyed, despite all of Gilman's claims, had self-repaired over thousands of years, just like any other Necron structure. Yet, Kraken was not the greatest threat. It is essential to understand that Behemoth, Kren, and Leviathan are just a small portion of the Tyranids who are still traversing the darkness between galaxies. I will tell you briefly about them. I shall start with the tendril of Kraken Hive fleet, known as Hive Fleet Tiameta, name given due to the system long ago captured by the Tyranids at the beginning of the 31st millennium. This lost Imperium system was discovered by a fleet of Explorator who encountered a very strange fleet of Tyranids, Duetto. The shadow in the warp. The fleet of Explorator was unable to transmit a signal back to base and thus went missing. The problem surfaced when the Eldari from Craft World and arrived in the Tiamat system and discovered on the largest planet in the sector, entirely covered in jungles, and named Zoraya, a massive organic structure the size of an entire continent. Its structure was composed of chitin and soft flesh, resembling brain tissue, and it hummed with psychic power. The structure was surrounded by a formidable shadow in the warp, causing a cerebral shock that literally struck Thiari. Induced by the hive fleet, the Tyranids had grown a creature the size of a continent on the planet and guarded it with a living armada. Naturally, the Inquisition also learned of this and concluded it was some sort of psychic beacon directing a new tendril of the Great Devourer towards our GI galaxy. And this psychic beacon was yet unfinished for High Fleet. Tiamat constantly infiltrated other systems to seek new biomass needed to complete the construction of the Cenas Flesh Tower. The peculiarity lies in that Tiamat does not consume all the biomass of a planet, but is engaged in guarding the sea's territory, perhaps because of the psychic beacon on one of the planets known as the World of Heinrich's March. Many worshippers of the dark gods emerged, tormenting slaves, sacrificing the innocent, and constructing edifices in the name of the chaos. Gods one day, a new secret cult known as the Choir of the Void emerged there. The leader of the cult, nicknamed the Conduit, told the Lost Ones about a race of interstellar saviors who awaited their children on a paradise planet in the Tiamut system. All chaos cultists favor such planets, hence, they organized a massive uprising. Millions of slaves killed their masters, seized spacecraft, and flew to the Tyranids where they were sequentially converted into biomass. Unsurprisingly, Tiamat eventually attracted the Imperium's attention. The Death Watch sent a kill team led by Junim to Zoria and was shocked by the enormous Tyranid structure they found there. They were discovered and ultimately all space. Marines of the Death Watch perished. Sergeant Junim managed to warn the ship's crew in orbit about the Tyranid structure. Later, Inquisitor Fus Kripman, considered an outcast by everyone in the Imperium, arrived at Watch Fortress. Halmut Watch Commander Vus received the Inquisitor, and together they studied the threat and developed a plan to destroy the gigantic structure of Tiam. Incidentally, this is no easy task for the carapace of each hive. Tiamat creature is made of a unique Ketus composite, allowing it to withstand the most powerful strikes and energy surges. Tyranids can adapt to the situation, and if necessary can even colonize a planet, but this is not the case with all of them. For example, High Fleet Wymanganda simply kills and eats everyone, then rises from the ashes. Like a phoenix many times, the Imperium claimed to have destroyed it, but in reality, the Tyranids just burrowed deep into the populated worlds and emerged when they were ready. High Fleet Yunganda is extremely patient and somehow always stays one step ahead of its enemies for planetary assaults. High Fleet Yanda tries to stay away from defensive systems, hurling various cosmic debris at the planet. It accomplishes this with tendrils on the outer hulls of the ships, of course. Most of the debris bombs are shot down by planetary defenses, but some reach the surface. Imanganda places Ravenamok and Trigon within the Deb-Phi asteroids. As soon as the destroid reaches the ground, the creatures dig into the soil and begin tearing tunnels beneath the main defensive structures. If detected, they simply burrow deeper underground. This way, the Tyranids of Junganda can wait for months or even years, and when the planetary assault is ready, they simply emerge from the ground and devour everyone. A similar situation occurred on the world of Geeden II. High Fleet Junganda hurled asteroids at the planet and retreated. The local governor declared victory over the invaders, while the Tyranids infiltrated the lower levels of Geeden II's defenses and devoured everything. Then the main fleet appeared in orbit and finished the job. Another advantage of Imanganda is the fact that it does not attack well-fortified outposts, instead consuming various smaller border worlds. They are not well defended, and over time the fleet accumulates mass Yorman. Gander also likes to set traps directly on space stations. Once Battle Fleet Gamek was dispatched to the planet Sosia, a call for help had come from. Thereupon, exiting the warp, the Imperial forces found destroyed shipyards, a heap of asteroids, and Deb but not a single Hive fleet. The fleet slowly entered the asteroid field, and the officers realized that all the asteroids around were teeming with Tyranids. As a result, Battle Fleet Gami was completely destroyed. Of course, the Imperium has brave souls capable of standing against the Tyranids. For example, Admiral Vitiger and Hanro during the Battle of the Black Nebula. He inflicted significant damage on Jormungandr in a long, bloody space battle. The trouble is that a few years later, the fleet returned and reports began to come in from all over about thousands of Tyranids bursting from the ground in the Tharsi sector and wreaking havoc. Free traders and simple merchant ships tell stories of fleeing from bioships tethered together like comets, and these stories are absolutely true. The Tyranids have a fleet called Gorgon. For a long time, Gorgon tormented the eastern fringe, harrying the colonies of the TOA Empire. Hordes of repulsive creatures ravaged worlds and ecosystems, spewing spores into the skies. All who opposed them perished in agony. This was facilitated by the many toxins produced by the Hive. The fact is that absolutely every organism produced by Hive Fleet Gorgon carries within itself a poisonous gland filled with sentient spores that quickly develop and become what is needed, depending on the target of the attack. When the spores attack prey, the absorbed matter enters. The spore tubes of toxic hive tyrants also collect it, allowing the entire swarm to gather information about the biomass composition through the synaptic network. After this, the hive fleet quickly adapts, alters its structure, and produces new, more suitable poisons and toxins. Hive Fleet Gorgon decimated the colonies on World Shadra and numerous smaller outposts, but upon reaching the TAA colony of Kamise, they encountered awakening Necrons on a dead moon who fought back against the Hive Fleet. The Tower were ready to praise their saviors, but the Necrons captured. The Tower inhabitants' Fleet Gorgon was pained, but continued to annihilate the Tower inhabitants. An Imperial Navy fleet sent into the warp more than 150 Terran years before to support the then ongoing Damel Gulf Crusade arrived at Keelan. But they too knew nothing about the Tyranids. The fleet was commanded by Castellan Kusk, and he was greatly surprised. By Hive Fleet, Gorgon, the TOA and the Imperium had to combine their efforts to repel the Tyranids. Both sides suffered significant losses, but destroyed the majority of the Tyranids. At some point, the armies of the Toau and the Imperium believed they had eradicated all the Tyranids in the area. In reality, Hive Fleet Gorgon reappeared several decades later, encountering the plague Hulk of Omnak. This was a rather humorous sight, the poisonous Tyranids attempting to kill the followers of Nurgle with poison. It might seem absurd, but after consuming a couple of plague marine bodies, Fleet Gorgon released a new toxin using it. The Tyranids easily defeated the Heralds of Nurgle because their skin and flesh simply slide off their bones. Currently, Hive Fleet Gorgon continues to torment Imperial worlds on their path. The Pegasus system, known for its fertile agri-worlds, was destroyed. Not all Tyranids are pleased with the followers of Nurgle. For example, one of the tentacles of Leviathan known as Lotan collided with the jungle world of Hesp against the Vectorium of the Death Guard's 4th and STH, who began bombarding the Tyranids with viral bombs and infecting them with demonic diseases. Tyranids actually started launching their poisonous spores. First, the problem is that the jungle world of Hesp is left as an endless sea of toxic slime, too virulent for even the Hive Fleets to devour. Now you ought to know about Hive Fleet Naga. The Eldar referred to Naga as shade. The Imperium generally paid no attention to it, considering it merely fragment of behemoth wandering through space and soon to die of starvation. The fact is that in the early years of the Tyranid invasion, few believed there were other high fleets of the Tyranids. They seemed too terrifying. Additionally, the Tyranids of Naga were in poorly explored regions of the Imperium and did not attack central worlds. The only place where High Fleet Naga ventured was the Iberic cluster. However, given the raging warp storms there, no attention was paid to it. The downside was that when the storm subsided, there were no living humans left in the Iberic cluster, nor were there Tyranids. The High Lords of Terror read the reports, stamped them, and forgot all about. The Asuran suffered the most damage from High Fleet Naga. They lost 2 maiden worlds and 7 Exodite worlds. If Naga had advanced further, it would have been the Tao Empire's turn to suffer. We owe it to Thea Suryani that High Fleet Naga did not reach the Imperium when the Tyranids attacked the Exodite planet's several craft. Worlds immediately united and sent their forces to repel the enemies. These were Idari Yandan and Malanai. In the end, Fleet Naga was engaged by the warships of Idari and Malanai, but Fleet Naga decided to split into 2 parts, one heading towards the world of Halel, which immediately began being bombarded with Emtic spores. The Asani, of course, do not give up easily, so they fought as fiercely as possible. Exodite, Lord Wee Yanil battled a Hive-time tyrant, in a duel in which he perished, taking the Highness Tyranid with him. It was here that a young Prince Eel rose to prominence as Yandan arrived to assist under the command of Admiral Dryas. Admiral Dress died in battle Ryton. His ship and Uriel took command, finishing off the Tyranid ships. Unfortunately, the young prince was too late. On the planet, the World Spirit Shrine was finally taken, overwhelmed by rage. Uriel gave the order to scour all life from Halel. High Fleet Naga decided to capture not only the Exodite planets, but also craft. World Malanai, a lone and wounded bioship, appeared above the battered craft world and launched a few metic spores into it, after which contact with Malen was lost. The culprit was the fierce zoanthrope known as the Doom of Malen. Had it not been the forces of Prince Aile and Yandan, High Fleet Naga might have continued its victory IOU's rampage, but Theashuran prevailed and defeated the last Hive tyrant in the battle at Soroth Forge. Pinnacle, Naga was destroyed, but before its demise the fleet absorbed numerous samples of previously unknown forms of biomass. Thanks to this, the hive mind gained extensive knowledge about the Asani. Now let's talk about Hive Fleet Hydra. This particular hive fleet specializes in seeking out the remnants of other great fleets and devouring them, assimilating their genetic memory. There is no mercy from Hydra for any Tyranids encountered along its path. They simply love consuming their own kind. Imperial citizens, upon spotting High Fleet Hydra on the horizon, might think it is not a problem. How could one fear such a small band of Tyranids? This is the primary mistake of those who encounter Hydra as the Hive Fleet approaches its victim's world. It begins to seed its atmosphere with thousands of SP clusters, each containing dozens of Horms and other creatures. When the local defensive forces begin to attack the Tyranids, Hydra, each dying organism, emits a synaptic impulse akin to a psionic scream right before death. Upon hearing this, the spores, hovering above the ground, begin to drop their live cargo. You kill one Tyranid, and in its place, a dozen more appear, and all of them rush towards the source of the call. The primary strategy of Hydra is that the Hive Fleet prefers to arrive in sectors that have recently repelled an attack from a major Hive Fleet. When the weakened and exhausted defenders face a new threat, they simply do not have the strength to overcome it. Additional Hydra Tyranids devour the remains of their kin in orbit, aiding in their assault against the planet's defenders. As you know, the Imperium has numerous scholars attempting to find ways to deal with the Tyranids. For instance, Magos, Cobb biologist Eos Van Zendri, believes that the consumption of their kin by the Hydra fleet leads to a new stage of the Tyranids' invasion. Hydra learns and prepares new fleets to attack places where they previously failed to achieve victory. Once across, Van Zender dispatched research vessels to the lowest system to study Hydra, where the Hive fleet was consuming the world of Cork. The ship studied the Tyranids, observing how they devoured civilians, all in the name of Science Hive Fleet Danan. This Hive fleet is different, and the defenders of the Jericho Reach quickly began to distinguish it from others. It was quite simple. Firstly, the Daon Tyranids exhibited some extraordinary adaptation abilities. After each consumed world, they became increasingly difficult to subdue. Moreover, they were particularly determined to conquer the entire Jericho Reach, creating new and horrific creatures continuously. Daon's evolution was so rapid and ruthless that in just a few years, the fleet spawned numerous beings and weaponry that the Imperium had never encountered before, but the main weapon of Hive Fleet Daon became the Daon Overlord. The Overlord first appeared during the opening days of the battle for Castel, leading a mighty swarm against the amethyst spires of the Timov Hive, rending through its walls and dispatching its defenders. In a month-long orgy of carnage and slaughter, those who survived the fall of the Hive remember the dreadful beast in nightmare-filled sleep. The Daon Overlord is in appearance similar to a Hive tyrant, but differs enough to stand apart from its lesser brethren and be remembered by those who see it looming across the battlefield, covered in slimy plates of chitin that constantly drip and leak fluid. The Overlord projects an aura of horror and menace unmatched within the swarm. Its importance and power are also readily apparent when it strides alongside other Tyranid creatures, its powerful presence emboldening and maddening the lesser creatures more so than would be expected from any link to the hive mind some Imperial Warren Guardsmen have even developed a theory that the Overlord seeks vengeance upon the Imperium for some unknown slight, but such thoughts are best kept unspoken. There are many rumors about how the Overlord came to be. Some believe that the Overlord is a specific genome for the Hive fleet, which existed long before arriving in the Imperium, and that it is an ideal combat form assembled from all known Tyranid knowledge, be that as it may. The Overlord was observed in almost all the major battle zones of the Aurus salient, where it, along with its army, conquered Imperial fortifications. This led the Imperium to believe that the Overlord is not the only such Tyranid monster, and this is reasonably logical, for why would the Hive pursue individualism? Its mind will devise a new, efficient creature and then mass-produce it. However, the Overlord may also be a being that is constantly reborn in a new body out of vengeance, and of course, immense experience more than anything. Though the Lord's dream of uncovering Order Xenosan the Death Watch, of course, but all attempts so far have ended in total failure, and the deaths of battle brothers, wherever the Overlord is killed, it will resurrect and reappear at the head of its nightmarish Hive Fleet Daon. The next fleet is Hive Fleet Kronos, which is relatively small but renowned primarily for emitting an incredible shadow. In the war, essentially, it generates a powerful psionic signal that affects vast star systems, preventing ships from traveling in the warp and sending astropath signals. So strong is the psychic connection between Kronos and the Hive mind that a stifling aura of null power drifts ahead of its invasion swarms, agonizing psychically active foes and draining their spiritual energy to bolster its own hosts. After its appearance, Kronos releases millions of its warriors as well as organic missiles, trying to avoid close combat. This is because the Tyran know that the Imperium and other races have no particular issues with close combat. so it is better to attack. From a distance, it is worth noting that Tyranids generally detest chaos, and the warp as its flows do not provide the Tyranids with food to satiate their eternal hunger. So the hive fleets bypass areas of the Imperium with raging warp storms. This was the case until the appearance of Kronos. The Tyranids of Hive Fleet Kronos did devour everything they see, moving along the edge of the Great Rift towards the galactic core. The zones of greatest psychic activity attract the Tyranids of Kronos, where there are more warp storms and demons, as well as planets with cultists and heretics. Generally speaking, the Hive Fleet simply consumes everyone it encounters. The organisms spawned by its bioships are perfectly designed to eradicate the taint of the Immaterium. Once during the Battle of the Wolf's Head, an Imperial Navy fleet under the command of Admiral Gron is engaging a massive Chaos War fleet at the Wolf's Head Nebula, when scores of Tyranid bioships enter the battle, ignoring the Imperial ships. The Tyranids of Hive Fleet Kronos smash their way into the Chaos Formation, swarming over the colossal Despoiler class battleship at its center. Not questioning his good fortune, Gresson unleashes a final salvo and orders the Retreat Hive Fleet, or Aeris, was created for those who love to fly, as it prefers massed airborne assaults. Its flying creatures dive upon their victims from the sky and tear out their hearts. There are some who believe that Hive Fleet or Ouroboros was the very first Tyranid fleet to encounter mankind. These theorists cite the ancient histories of Cardinal Mamulus the Elder, who spoke of a nightmarish legion of winged entities aflame with infernal agu, which savaged the Helen sector sometime in the early 36th millennium. If we were to examine the relics of those times, we could find traces of bioplasma on them, which is typically used by the Tyranids, and a swarm of flying monsters is no small matter. It's difficult to confuse them with anything else. The standard attack of Ouroboros looks like this. Aoris favors massed aerial assaults, filling the air with so many gargoyles and harpies that those below must fight in near dark. It strikes swiftly, honing in upon areas of strategic value with unerring accuracy by slaughtering officers and destroying communications outposts. Orab Boristeers the eyes from its prey, leaving them confused and vulnerable. But the main creatures of Aoris appear more primitive compared to other Tyranids, hence standard combat tactics simply do not work. The Hive Fleet has appeared in utterly diverse parts of the galaxy. In the 36th millennium Aura is fought with the Great Crusade at the edge of the Eye of Terror, and was defeated thousands of years after that Ouroboros reappeared on the border of the Thean sector. It was at this moment that the Hive Fleet received the name Ouroboros to destroy Hive Fleet. Ouroboros, the best units of the Imperium are dispatched. For instance, the Swarm Crushers, a subdivision of the Astrom Militarum Caden, 14th, which received the name during the Second Tyrannic War. This was because they were masters of destroying Tyranids. But confidence swiftly turns to panic, as the Caden tactics have little or no impact upon the Xeno's pinpoint shots that should have ruptured vital organs, have almost no effect, while salvos of airburst shells filled with anti-Tyranid chemicals merely provide cover for the swarm stunned by the ineffectiveness of their defense. The Cadians nevertheless sell their lives dearly before they are devoured at the moment. The Silver Drakes, a newly founded primary Space Marine chapter, are tasked with turning back Hive Fleet or Aoris. For now the advantage is on the side of Ouroboros in general. Ouroboros can be distinguished by blue-black carices and slight glow that they emit, resembling a sorcerous mist. There are numerous tendrils and small hive fleets. For example, Hive Fleet Mock was a minor hive fleet that plunged through the Ghoul stars into the galactic north of the known galaxy. In the year 998 of the 41st millennium, it caused the most problems for the agri-world Yolo. The world's spaceport was defended by Imperial Guard regiments comprised of Agathon Kakan Jungle Fire, fighters Kanak Moloth, and Mauryan Iron Guard regiments. The interesting fact is that the Adeptus Mechanicus discovered a valuable standard template construct STC on the planet, which needed to be transported to Mars. The warriors fought against the Tyranids to their last breath and bought enough time for the Adeptus Mechanicus to flee with their precious STC discovery. In defense of Fleet Mock the 9th Foro and Firstborn Regiment, also known as the Old Irascibles, intervened previously. A part of the regiment had heroically sacrificed itself to defend the factory city of Polia from the Tau Empire on the planet Nimbos. Yet on Yolo they were also annihilated. Although the fighters perished heroically, they held the main hive city for 18 solar months against the brutal onslaught of a splinter. Fleet of High Fleet Moloch, with the onset of midwinter and with the rapid depletion of ammunition and supplies, the 9th Vostroyan knew that they were doomed and vowed to sell their lives dearly only when the bulk of the Tyranid swarm had passed. Into the city did the regiment detonate its nucleonic stack, incinerating the hive city, its defenders, and an estimated 85% of the Tyranid swarm. With the coming of midwinter, the few surviving Tyranid organisms eventually starved to death and the Splinter Fleet was entirely defeated. It must be understood that the Tyranids are constantly evolving and can produce incredibly strange lifeforms such as Zots. Several large nomadic fleets of curious conch-like spacecraft apparently grown from natural stone were sighted through the Segmentum Tempestus and Ultima late in the 38th millennium, bearing many similarities to hive fleets the ships resembled. Those of the Tyranids, but on board were some centroid bio-creatures which resembled Tyranid but communicated telepathically with those they encountered. But the Tyranids usually do not communicate with anyone. The Tyranids revealed that they were slaves fleeing their masters and now seeking a new world to settle, but their frequent contacts with other alien races and attempts to settle in Imperium space caused them to be declared Xenos Horribilis. Early in the 39th millennium, this race was called the Zoticid, is one of the most widespread slave races created by the Tyranids. The Imperium eradicated the Zotes in the process, uncovering the terrifying truth about this race, which, by the way, began to fiercely resist humanity, the last known Colossus. Vessel was eventually destroyed in the year 226 of the 39th millennium above the world of Zora. The crash of the ship on the planet rendered the northern hemisphere uninhabitable for nearly 1,000 years. The Adeptus Mechanicus attempted to understand what kind of race this was, but could not come to a unanimous conclusion over time. It became clear that this was some new hive fleet. They named it the Colossus. It was also not entirely clear whether Hive Fleet Colossus had been destroyed during this campaign. Following Hive Fleet Kraken of the Second Tyrannic War, an even larger Hive Fleet Leviathan arrived in the Imperium. He attempted to absorb the remnants of Kraken to obtain all the bio-information about the galaxy collected by Kraken. Leviathan almost succeeded, but the tendril was destroyed. Inquisitor Cryman, after 2 Tyrannic Wars, was finally ready for the new appearance of the Tyranids, predicting the arrival of the mass hive fleet. Moreover, Leviathan formed 2 tendril, several hundred light-years apart, like jaws clamping down on the Imperium. Communication was lost with the worlds of the Segmentum Tempestus Ultima and Solar, a direct indication of a major Tyranid offensive. The most terrifying aspect was that the Tyranids attacked deep within the Imperium, where people were particularly unprepared for such invasions. Leviathan was moving directly towards Terra to consume the Emperor and all its inhabitants on the path of one of Leviathan's main 10 lay. The planet Tarsus Ultra, defended by the Ultramarines under Captain Uriel Ventris, along with the Mortifactors chapter and a Death Watch kill team. Inquisitor Cayman also arrived to aid in the planet's defense, playing a crucial role. He deployed punishment, squads, and devised a toxin capable of destroying the Tyranid forces. Uriel Ventris captured a living Lorand. With its help, Magos biologist Lucard developed the toxin which Ventris then delivered with the Death Watch directly into the heart of the enemy fleet to the Gorn Queen. Deceivingly, Cryptman, along with the Mortifactors chapter, invoked Exterminatus on the first world conquered by the Tyranids in the system. The forces of the Imperium barely managed to fend off the tendril moving directly towards Terra, but the Leviathan fleet was enormous. Realizing that this was only a minor problem, Cryptman ordered the creation of a cordon sanitary to buy time for the main forces of the Imperium to arrive, to deprive the Tyranids of food. He invoked Exterminatus on the Imperium worlds in the path of High Fleet Leviathan. And they did so. The Tyranids suffered devastating losses, and when they landed on a planet, it was bombarded with cyclonic torpedoes and virus bombs. Such a genocide had not been seen in the Imperium for thousands of years. Billions of civilians perished, and hundreds of worlds were destroyed. The ecclesiarchy was outraged and demanded that Cayman be declared a traitor. Furthermore, the abandoned Imperium worlds were occupied by a local Orc empire. Ultimately, the Inquisitor was declared a renegade, stripped of all titles and forced into hiding. Nonetheless, he did not forget his mission. Moreover, High Fleet Leviathan had, indeed slowed therefore, in essence, his plan. Worked, but at what cost? His next plan was even crazier. Cryptman decided to direct the Tyranids into battle against the Orc-held Octavius system, hoping that the Orcs and Tyranids would annihilate each other, and then the Imperium would arrive to finish off. Anyone left standing, Inquisitor's Death Watch delivered a Gin Stealer in stasis on a space. Hulk then directed it to the Octavius system. There was a vast Orc empire the size of Ultramar. The Orcs began to kill the Tyranids, but the trouble was that the Orcs were providing too much biomass to the hive, and they constantly adapted. Therefore, the outcome of the war was of no significance. Whoever won would emerge from the battle very strong and be an opponent of the Imperium, the main forces of Hive Fleet. Leviathan, of course, did not remain stationary and flew directly to the homeworld of the Blood Angels. Baal, the Tyranids, almost triumphed. Then demons arrived due to the opening of the Great Rift. The Blood Angels barely resisted losing an enormous number of soldiers, numbers unseen in those times. But High Fleet Leviathan was not pacified by this at the beginning of the 42nd millennium. It initiated the Fourth Tyrannic War, attacking the western reaches of the Segmentum Pacificus. This time, Leviathan attacked simultaneously from above and below when viewed on a G-galactic map, and moreover using two new tendrils named High Fleet Neon and High Fleet Promore. The targets of these tendrils were the Segmentum Solar and Terra, and this was a problem because almost all Imperium forces were engaged in the Indomitus Crusade, trying to reclaim territories from the followers of Chaos in the Imperium Nous. The first sign of invasion was the silence that enveloped much of the Segmentum Pacificus. The magnitude of the predicament was realized in the Morpheum sector as a result of the appearance of the shadow in the warp. The high astropath Gaoth tragically perished, suddenly transforming into a gigantic monstrosity with tentacles, and began slaughtering other astropaths within the choir of astropaths. Panic ensued. Thousands of ships, with refugees, fled towards the nearest safe stars and landed on planets without any quarantine, leading to horrifying uprisings as soon as the Adeptus Custodes learned of the impending threat to Terra. Captain General Tran Valoris immediately convened the High Lords. of Terra to defend Terra. Valoris, along with Lord Commander Solar Arcadian Leonis, organized the largest mobilization of the 42nd millennium, also forming rapid response forces known as the Soul Blades. The Soul Blades would consist of a mix of Space Marines, Sisters of Battle Militarum Tempestus, Knights Mechanicum, Inquisition, and even Custodes, and were GR-ed a wide range of strategic autonomy. They were to conduct aggressive attacks on the Tyranids, preventing the tendrils of Leviathan from advancing. The Soul Blades were successfully destroying Tyranids, albeit suffering heavy losses, but they managed to slow the advance of the tendrils Nylon and Prothor. However, Leviathan deployed yet another tendril known as Gillis, about which no one knew anything. Grillas quickly devoured the holdings of the leagues of Votan Orcs, Asani and Xenos, and then nearly an entire Basor subsector was captured and consumed. Thankfully, several members of the Soul Blades managed to infiltrate and halt the expansion of Gillis. The problem is, when you destroy one tentacle of the Leviathan fleet, two others begin to move towards Terra. This is what the Imperium fears the most. Also linked to Gillis is the famous battle for the planet Ogamdis, spite the tentacle attacking Ogram. With all its might, the Imperium did not surrender. For every forward post of the Imperial Guard that was destroyed, tens of thousands of dead Tyranids followed. When the Soul Blade Basor subsector arrived, on the planet the locals even began to have some glimmer of hope. The warriors of the Imperium began to reclaim hive cities and spaceports and advanced forward. Yet the hunger of the Great Devourer is not so easily denied like a wounded beast. The Tyranid swarms reacted as one and lashed out. With ferocious force, the fortress line on the Matauri Delta fell. Defenders rotted alive by the thick biosmog of countless toxin beasts. Next came the turn of the great hive Theorius. 3 million Tyranids breached it via its aquifer shrine. At this point it became clear that Aeam was doomed, and the Imperium began evacuation, while the Tyranids devoured everyone on the surface and began siphoning biomass into their bioships through capillary towers. All you need to know about the Tyranids is that there is no individualism inside the hive. All creatures are connected by a single collective consciousness. Nevertheless, some creatures of the hive are considered synaptic creatures. Their job is to control the lesser a species within the hive and express the will. Of the hive mind, synapse is the psychic force of the Tyranids. Mostly synaptic creatures are hive tyrants, Tyranid warriors, broodlords or zoanthropes, powerful psychers. They are psychic conduits of the hive mind, commanding everything. On the battlefield, if you kill them, the hive can lose control. Therefore they are the priority target for everyone without guiding synapse. The creatures of the hive become normal animals, driven by instincts. However, some can live without synapse possessing their own will, for instance gin stealers. I would also like to tell you about the heroes of the hive, which of course they also have. Let us begin with one of the oldest creatures of the Tyranid race, known as the Swarm Lord. This is a supremely brutal creature that has exterminated entire civilizations and consumed thousands of species. It is known as the Swarm Lord by the Imperium, but it has been known by many other names, including the Tyrant Lord of the Hive Mind, the Herald of the Great Devourer, and the Destroyer of the Kara Empire. It has caused numerous problems in the galaxy. For instance, it led the consumption of the Mega System, the devastation of the Orc Wagaluk, and the destruction of Brinar. The most interesting thing is that the Swarm Lord can appear at different times within various hive fleets and under entirely different circumstances. The crux of the matter lies in the accumulated knowledge base of the hive. If the Swarm Lord perishes, it is simply reborn and dispatched to a new hive fleet with all information transferred through the synaptic network. Essentially, it is immortal and grows stronger with each resurrection. Moreover, the Swarm Lord is endowed with a semblance of independence, unlike most other Tyranids. The last time the Swarm Lord was seen was during the Hive Fleet Leviathan's assault on Sukus, after the opening of the Great Rift part of Leviathan was consumed along with the Swarm Lord. The next hero of the Tyranids is Old One-Eye. He was the Carnifex, who spearheaded the Tyranid Hive Fleet. Behemoth's assault on the Ultramarines world of Calth. Its rampage was halted when a forgotten hero of the Imperium fired a plasma pistol through its eye and into its brain solar decades later. After Hive Fleet, Behemoth had been driven from Cal. A band of smugglers stumbled across its body, frozen intact. In the ice packs of Cal, they thaw it out, hoping to get a bounty for the corpse. But Old One-Eye's grievous wounds instantly began to heal. It soon awoke and slaughtered the smugglers. Isolated from the Tyranid hive, Mindakarif effect reverts to its instinct to mindlessly kill. And so Old One-Eye's release heralded a series of Tyranid raids on Kiel. It was then neutralized by the Ultramarines' scout sergeant. Telon fired into its eye again during a battle, causing it to fall into a ravine. However, its body was never found, but Old One-Eye aura, Carifex that resembles it, has subsequently appeared in other hive fleets. It is constantly killed only to reappear again. Old One-Eye's ability to heal damage inflicted on it during combat has given rise to theories of it being an unstable mutation, a Tyranid experiment in rapid cell regrowth, abandoned by the hive mind, but with the arrival of the Hive Fleet Leviathan. This mutation has become nearly standard in every Carif effect. Occasionally one-eyed specimens have also been encountered. I should note that some of the first Djinn stealers encountered by the Imperium were Imol. Djinn stealers. They differ from others in that they can instantly alter their flesh, lengthen their finger claws, merging them into curved blades and hooks, or create tendons from their fingers to bind their victims. When a brood attacks the Imulgin stealers' bodies, thicken their quitus. Carpies and their hides become tougher. Furthermore, they can change their coloration to become nearly invisible at night to alter their bodies. Djinn. Stealers need to eat frequently and ab abundantly if there is no food. The brood goes into hibernation until something awakens them, something tasty. It is unknown to which hive fleet the Imulgin stealers belong. Their origin remains a mystery. Perhaps they were part of a hive fleet that disappeared long ago or was consumed. What is important is that they dream of reuniting with the hive mind and always seek out other Tyranids spreading across the galaxy like a plague. But the most peculiar thing is that the Tyranids' BI ships do not consume the biomass of Imulgin stealers to prevent their abilities and knowledge from spreading through. The swarm. Perhaps they would remain in stasis on some dead imperial world. However, they are constantly discovered by adventurers and brought back to civilization, where they infect everything they see, hoping that the hive will eventually come to reclaim them. It is worth discussing the Zrop known as the Doom of Milan. Zopes are powerful psychers apparently engineered from harvested Eldari DNA to form living conduits for the focused power of the Tyranid hive. They transmit the hive mind's orders and can fire psychic energy at enemies. Zoanthropes appear as worm-like creatures with bulbous heads and atoid limbs. The Doom of Milan is not merely a zoanthrope but a unique variant which first emerged during the battle between Hive, Fleet Naga, and the Malanai craft world. Fleet Naga deployed a Emtic spore onto the ship which contained a powerful zoanthrope. It began absorbing the surrounding energy, increasing its power. At one point, the Doom of Malanai became nearly invincible, exploding the heads of Asurani warriors with a single thought, and snapping Wraithbone war constructs. It annihilated everything, with only a few Asani surviving, and the doom of Malanai was later found drifting in space years later, with the craft world left as an empty shell when there is a need to gather the genetic material of enemies. The Hive deploys Malanthropes, a fairly rare form of Tyranids, whose existence was only recently discovered by the Imperium thesis, because Malanthropes always remain behind the main assault of the Tyranids and only start their work when the number of enemy soldiers is significantly reduced if the Tyranids are destroyed. The Malanthropes do not enter the battlefield at all, as more battles were fought. Between the Tyranids and the Imperium, however, reports describing the Malanthrope were often mistaken for sightings of Zoanthropes. It was not until Inquisitor Back encountered a Malanthrope on the world of Moloch II that the Ordo Xenos realized that this was a distinct new bioform, and a Xenos hunter team was dispatched to investigate Malanthropes. Selectively gather and process the genetic material of fallen enemies until the Hive consumes them. The monster prefers to consume its prey alive, capturing it with its tentacles, injecting a paralyzing toxin, and then swallowing it whole over days. The creature slowly digests the skin. Flesh and bones of its victims, who are placed in swollen digestive sac the prey, remains fully conscious, experiencing indescribable agony. Upon completing the process, the Malanthrope acquires all the information it needs. Malanthropes move across the battlefield using their psychic powers levitating above the ground. Lictors also have notable creatures such as the Deathleaper, a rare vari of the lyre, representing the pinnacle of its evolution, and excelling in utilizing various biological forms finds people, and then extracts their brains. It was first noticed on the missionary world of St. Caspin Hive. Fleet Leviathan was headed there every night. Death Leper infiltrated the command bunker of the local cardinal and murdered all his aides and bodyguards. But at the last moment, it would once again vanish into the shadows, leaving behind only Cardinal Salem drenched in the blood of his aides. Hive wanted to drive the cardinal into a psychosis and eventually succeeded in making the morale of his people falter, enabling Hive Fleet to assault the world. No one has seen the Lictor since this incident. Ordinary Tyranid warriors also have their hero named Parasite of Morks. It is named after the imperial fortress world of Morks in Segmentum Ultima, which successfully defended against the invasion of Hive Fleet Kraken. But on the 10th day of the invasion, a strange and new bioform of the Tyranids infiltrated the planet. It was a Tyranid warrior with wings like a bat. It began diving into the trenches, slashing the local defenders with its tail, which had a snake-like fang or something similar at the tip. With it, it injected Ripper parasites, the size of a human finger, into the bodies of soldiers, which quickly developed, consumed the hosts from within, and burst out of their flesh in a spray of blood information about the parasite of Mora, rapidly spread among the ranks of the Imperial Guard. Thus, within a few weeks, Morks was overrun by a flood of Ripper parasites. The local inhabitants managed to transmit a signal to the Imperium about the new threat from the Hive, and since then, it has been anticipated and greatly feared on various different planets. Even among the ravenous Tyranids, known for burrowing into the ground with their powerful serpentine bodies, there are heroes. One of them is called Red Terror, and it is a unique Ravener of the Hive mind. Red Terror appeared on the mining world of Devin Primus in 20 days. It annihilated all the local miners. No one could stop it. The local Imperial Guard fired blindly at it with their guns, but none saw its true form. Survivors described the creature as having a dark crimson carapace with claws capable of tearing through concrete. Red Terror appeared not only on Devlin, but also in different parts of the galaxy, always killing vast numbers of helpless Imperial Guardsmen before simply vanishing into the ground. The Tyranids also have the loose horror, a creature several times larger than a carnifex. It appeared on a hive fleet of the Tyranids that was isolated from the main fleet and the hive mind through the process of evolution. A new creature was born which kills its enemies with deadly precision by simply hiding within its host. When the right moment arrives and the creature wants to satisfy its hunger, it bursts out of the host's body, striving to reach its kin overall. All Tyranid combat organisms are created to kill all living beings using fangs, claws, bioweapons, and parasites that devour the flesh of their prey. Living weapons are a hallmark of the Tyranids. They are literally extensions of their bodies. Creatures exist in symbiosis with one another, intertwining until they become a seamless whole. Sometimes it is even difficult to discern where the original organism is. A vital creature of the hive is the Gorn Queen, of which there are usually many on-hive ships. This is the highly intelligent Tyranid bioform that directs the evolutionary process and adapts the lesser forms to the required environment. The Norn Queens reside in vast chambers on hive ships, constantly consuming biomaterial while producing countless types of bioforms that constitute the hive fleet. The Gorn Queens are in constant communication through the collective consciousness and often debate which species to produce next and where it should be deployed, typically at the onset of an attack on worlds. The Tyranids deploy the alpha swarm of bioforms, which gather environmental information and relay it to the Norn Queens, who then, guided by the data, generate the next generation of Tyranid bioforms. The capture of an alpha wave Tyranid bioform can lead to the creation of a deadly neurotoxin which can directly affect the Norn Queen, as was done by the Ultramarines during the invasion of Ultramar by Hive Fleet Behemoth. The trouble is that after the death of a queen, the Tyranids immediately create several new queens. This is an instinctual survival mechanism of the Tyranid species that is known as the Hydra effect. However, it creates chaos among the creatures and they revert to an animalistic behavior, attacking one another. The Norn Queens possess an entire gene bank consisting of millions of different genotypes that can be used as building blocks for assembling new creatures. Most Tyranid bioforms are born in the form of tiny, grotesque larvae eggs that must develop until they hatch and grow into their mature and adult forms. The Gorn Queen has the Norn Emissary, a true Tyranid warrior, larger than even a hive tyrant. Emissaries combine brute strength with incredible psychic power. They were evolved for the singular purpose of preying on gifted enemy commanders or abducting knowledgeable prey from heavily defended strongholds. At the beginning of the Fourth Tyrannic War, the Queen sent 3 emissaries to infiltrate the fortress. Of the White Templars, one was to destroy the Genan seed repository, the second was to reach the command bridge, and the third was to kill the new Lord Commander, Solar Leonis. Ultimately, only one succeeded, killing a large number of the command staff on the bridge. But of course, Solar Leonis survived. High Tyrants are the commanders of the Tyranid armies who relay orders from the hive mind. These are massive, sturdy creatures whose bodies are protected by Kus plates. Hive Tyrants are powerful psychers. Thus, their synaptic contact is extremely strong and allows them to control the lesser creatures. If a hive tyrant is killed, the hive mind simply regenerates it, anew, gaining valuable experience from the enemy. The replacement hive tyrant possesses the knowledge of its predecessor, essentially making it impossible to kill. One of the most renowned hive tyrants is the Nephilim King, a monster that led a splinter of Hive Fleet. Behemoth Knights of House Raven attempted to kill him, but the court of the Nephilim King systematically destroyed the knights, one by one, on the planet ROR9. The surviving Imperial Knights swore vengeance. The foremost experts and enthusiasts of Tyranids are, of course, the Space Marines of the Death Watch. Within their fortress of Arok, they have a vast array of Tyranid variations, some of which are exceedingly strange and unexplored. For instance, a specimen that was caught in a stasis trap by a kill team. Although the Space Marines found nothing in the trap, they decided not to unpack it and sent it to Arok for further study. It turned out to be some new form of lictor or gin stealer, possessing chameleon-like abilities working through psionics. The human mind cannot recognize its deception, even with the help of aurices and sensors, and the creature can phase and pass through walls. To be certain, the Death Watch calibrated a sensor to ensure that if the creature were to escape, it would be destroyed, even if the personnel could not detect its escape. Nonetheless, the creature has yet to breach containment, and the Death Watch is already considering the option of exposing the creature to radiation to determine whether its powers cease after death. It must be understood that all reports indicate that High Fleet's Kraken Behemoth and Leviathan are merely the vanguard of an unprecedented force in the galaxy. No one knows. Many more High Fleets are traveling through the void between galaxies, intending eventually to reach the Milky Way and devour everything. One thing is known: one day the Tyranids will strike with all they have, and it will take every human in the Imperium just to slow down this force, for yet there will always remain the chance that even these efforts will not be enough.